Good morning and welcome to the Daily Cyber Briefing for Wednesday, the 20th of August. I'm Stephen Ridgway. Microsoft has released an emergency update that fixes Windows recovery, which they broke in the August 2025 security updates. So this is an issue affecting Windows 10 and earlier versions of Windows 11. And it basically means that if you are trying to recover your Windows system and keep your files, it simply gives a computer says no error. So if you are running Windows 10 or early Windows 11 instances, it would be a recommendation to install this patch, although probably not the most critical patch to be pushing out. Bear in mind that if you actually did need to recover your system, all of a sudden it would become critical. So one of those things to get scheduled in and dealt with at an appropriate time, but not completely ignored, I would suggest. Chrome has got a vulnerability in its V8 engine, which allows for, it's an out-of-bounds write vulnerability being tracked as CVE 2025 9132. So the vulnerability has been fixed. Just checking through the article here, the vulnerability has been fixed in Chrome version 139.0.7285.138 or .139 for Windows and Mac, and .138 for Linux. So if you are using Chrome, worth nudging it to get the update as soon as is reasonably possible. For you. As always, best not to sit on browser vulnerabilities for too long. Chrome has a tendency to pop up something, mostly if you configured it to do auto updates, which I think is the default. It'll sit there saying relaunch Chrome in order to fix, install updates or fix problems or whatever it might be, which is all good. If you don't particularly want to wait until it has identified the patch is available and downloaded it, you can shortcut the process by nudging Chrome to go and check for updates and then do a restart. Restart's pretty good at reopening all the open tabs anyway, so it should be a fairly neutral event fixing this problem. And then finally from me, there's an article in Dark Reading that talks about a piece of Linux malware known as RingReaper, which is using kernel functions to bypass EDR. So specifically, since kernel 5.1, which was released in around 2019, that introduced IOU-Ring. IOU-Ring? Haha. It's an interface that allows applications to perform asynchronous IO operations, reading and writing files and so on and so forth. It is more efficient and therefore faster than traditional system calls. But effectively, you chuck the I/O operations into a bucket. The kernel picks them up out of a bucket in batches and processes them rather than sequentially or looking, seeing what's in the queue and executing them one by one. The only trouble with that is that traditional EDR, in fact, most EDR solutions at the moment are not monitoring what is happening through IOU-Ring. This leads to post-compromise abuse, basically. Once malware has got the ability to, once malware is on the system, has got the ability to do things on the system, dealing with IO through IOU-Ring rather than through traditional system calls means that most, if not all, EDR solutions at the moment will miss what's going on. What can you do about it? Well, firstly, if your apps are not taking advantage of IOU Ring, you may be better off just disabling it, or you have to admit, I haven't tried disabling it. It may be possible to remove it. Does anybody make custom kernels anymore? I used to. Just have the things in the kernel that you actually want. We used to do that. I don't know whether anybody still does, or whether we probably think most people will just take whatever's thrown at them by their particular distribution. But you may be able to switch it off. You may want to, if you're particularly worried about this sort of stuff, you may be thinking of compiling kernels that don't contain stuff you don't need, in which case you won't have the problem. The other things that you can do is begin to look up monitoring. You can implement monitoring using IOU Ring setup, sys and related syscalls. They're unusual in enterprise environments, so you may want to flag up when apps are using those. Also worth getting alerts for binaries that query proc and dev PTS, or potentially network tables, querying network tables via IOU Ring instead of tools like PS or netstat. Kernel runtime security tools are kind of good idea as well. Again, they're not used so often, although that if you really, really, really want to understand what's going on on your endpoints or on any device, looking at what the kernel is doing is the solution. Anything that sits above the kernel only has a partial view of what's really happening. But basically, it's something to be aware of. Linux is an inherently secure operating system, as is BSD and macOS and so on and so forth. But that doesn't mean to say that there isn't malware or there aren't abuses that can be thrown at these operating systems. And you do need to understand the architecture a little in order to understand where some of those architectural vulnerabilities may be. So definitely worth reading if you are using Linux, and certainly reasonably modern versions of Linux, and have a little think about whether this is something that you feel that you need to address. Do your risk assessment on it and make an informed decision. Okay, that's all from me for today. Hope you